Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Well, good evening, friends. Let's pop on up here and welcome to this April 19, 2015 edition of Nightcast as we try a new experiment going live on live events as we also live stream on our regular cogtv.org website for Nightcast television. Opening story tonight, friends. Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi has called for more European action on sea migration after the latest deadly capsize of a boat in the Mediterranean. Let's go for that story for our opening.
This is a rescue operation which is outside the region envisaged by Mare Nostrum. So it is an operation which is carried out with great professionalism. But it underlines the real problem for us, that is to say that there is a scourge in the Mediterranean and in our continent, which is the 21st century slavery. This is a new slave trade. Italy arrested 976 of human traffickers. There are 976 people in Italian prisons who have been arrested. They have been detected, obviously, and many of these have been tried and sentenced. We do not want to be left alone, not just for this emergency at sea. Because when these tragedies happen, the sea is a horrible beast.
And friends, the main point I hope you get out of this story is the fact that what the Italian Prime Minister is complaining of is a lack of European solidarity. And that factor relates to, now let me see if I can get our switches changed over without a whole lot of hullabaloo this time. We have to change layers because of that new opening thing. I think we got it. There we are. But I have to go over here so that I can open up this next camera shot I want to bring to you that shows our, well, not that one. I actually want to show you our studio shot with the pictures over us here. Because the Italian Prime Minister complaining, bemoaning a lack of European solidarity relates to this statue up above my head that you can see here, which is the statue from the dream of King Nebuchadnezzar, reported in Daniel 2. And let's see, I think we can go close up on that statue above me right here with this shot. This is the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar saw in a dream. It's reported to us in Daniel chapter 2. And the king was very disturbed by this dream, this statue that he saw in his dream. So disturbed that he called his magicians, and he told them all he wanted to know what this dream meant. Magicians told him, "Oh, no problem, great King Nebuchadnezzar. Just tell us what was the dream you saw, and we'll be happy to tell you the meaning of the dream." King said, "Oh, no, you're not going to get me with that. I tell you the dream, you just make up anything you want. How would I know this is the true meaning of the dream?" He says, "If you really are magicians of the gods, then you tell me both what was the dream and its meaning. Then I'll know you have something in connection with the gods out there. Otherwise, you're heads." So King Nebuchadnezzar told all the magicians that if you cannot tell me what was the dream I dreamed, in addition to the interpretation of it, off go your heads. I'm killing you all. News got to Daniel. And Daniel would have been, and his friends, his three friends, would have been included in that death warrant against the magicians and the wise men and so on. Daniel and his 3 wise men friends having been trained in the king's palace. So Daniel and his friends, they made a plea before God and prayed, fasted, and said, God, help us out with this. Help us be able to tell the king his dream and what it means. And God gave Daniel both the dream and the meaning. And so when the aides of the king went before him and said, there's one man, O great king, who can interpret your dream for you. He said, well, bring him before me. And they brought Daniel before him, and the king said, well, I understand you can interpret my dream. And Daniel said, oh, no, not me, O great king, but there is a God in heaven who gives these dreams and who can tell the king the meaning of the dream. And so Daniel commenced to tell the dream, the meaning of the dream to the king, starting with the head of gold, explaining to King Nebuchadnezzar that you, O great King Nebuchadnezzar, are this head of gold on this statue. You, a world-ruling kingdom, and an empire that God has given you and made you the head of, a world-ruling empire. And after you, there will be another, represented by the breast and arms of silver. But it'll be inferior to your kingdom, just as silver is inferior to gold. And then after that, there'll be a kingdom, and that was the which one was that? Was that the Greek Empire or the Medes and Persian? At the moment, I'm kind of blanking on that. One or the other. And after you, there'd be the next kingdom. It's represented by the belly and the thighs of brass. And following that, the most important one for us today, friends, is the kingdom that would follow that, represented by the 2 legs of iron, representing the Roman Empire, coming down to today, where in these latter days there would be a revival of this Roman Empire, represented by the feet and toes that are pictured here of both iron and miry clay. And as some of you may well know, iron and clay does not mix. It means that the nations involved won't get along, and that's behind the complaint that the Italian Prime Minister is making in this news story we just played. He's bemoaning the lack of European solidarity, and that relates to those 2 feet just above me up there that are part iron and part miry or common clay. They don't mix. They don't get along. There is no real European solidarity. And you're going to be hearing more of that. Some of the news stories I'll have, kind of backup stories I'll have coming up for this week, some related to should the UK exit the EU, what that will mean for the UK, and what it'll mean also to the UK, and what it'll mean to the rest of the world, and some of the factors behind that. I'll be covering that later in the week. Tonight, though, I got a number of stories we want to continue on with. Being Sunday night after 2 nights off, we're off, as many of you know, on Friday night, Saturday night. Our next story, very similar to the one we just played, so I'm going to actually skip that one and then move ahead, except to just say that hundreds of people are believed to have drowned in a boat carrying up to 700 migrants that capsized in the Mediterranean Sea, according to the Italian Coast Guard. And that's part of that story that we were just reading, or just played the video on for the opening story tonight. Now, another story related to Europe. Bulgaria is the poorest EU country, but there is one industry which shows constant and rapid growth. So can the only booming sector in a Bulgarian poor economy elevate the country out of poverty and turn it into a Silicon Valley of Europe? That's the question for this next story, friends.
We are the new carpenters, we are the new gardeners, we create the new world. I'm Petko Karamochev, and I'm Bulgarian IT entrepreneur. We're in the Sofia Polytechnic Museum.
While he speaks a little bit in a foreign language, I'm just going to comment that Bulgaria is one of the two countries that Mr. Armstrong told us to really keep an eye on and watch. Once they come into the EU, he said things will accelerate very rapidly. He didn't explain why, but he said that would be the case. And Bulgaria, they're in there now. And, as it's saying here, they may be about to do some rapid growth as a result of the computer industry.
Bulgaria is booming at the moment. We have clients from all over the globe, including South Africa, including India. We are very well presented in the Central and Eastern European market. When I created my company, and in the early stage, say 2001,
Friends, we're going to come on out of that because it's a little bit hard to understand. He's speaking half English and half Italian, so maybe people in Europe can understand that, but a little hard on some of us from this part of the world. And so, but we'll be keeping an eye on any development in Bulgaria and keep mindful of that key factor revealed to us by God's servant through Mr. Herbert Armstrong, that once Bulgaria was in the EU, things would move along rapidly, and they're in there and looking like they're in there solid, even though the UK may exit with what they call a Brexit, I guess you'd pronounce that a Brexit, and Greece. There's news afloat that looks like Greece may do a Grexit, Grexit, a Greece exit. So those are a couple of stories we'll be watching, keeping an eye on. Interesting, though, to see Bulgaria starting to rise with the IT, the computer industry. There's news tonight, friends, related to disease epidemics. Let's take a look at our chart. Let's put it on the screen, full screen, right to the middle of that our chart, where it shows you the first 5 of the 6 seals from Revelation. And let me just check while I'm pausing here to make sure I've got the next story lined up properly. Okay, I think I do. I hope so. Okay, yeah, I can tell. That's it. All right, now, I wanted to put this on the screen and have you count over 4 to the 4th seal, the 4th column, where we've got the number 4, the word pale. In Revelation, the 4th seal is depicted as a pale horse. Some of you know that already. The rider of that horse is named Death, and Jesus Christ described, and it's said that alongside this pale horse and its rider named Death is Hades, hell, the grave, that just follows on the heels along with this pale horse and its rider named Death. And Jesus Christ described the activities of this pale horse and its rider named Death as primarily being loimos, the Greek word meaning disease epidemics, pestilence, the plagues of Egypt. Christ also said that between the 3rd seal and the 5th seal there would be seismos, a whole lot of growing seismic activity, commotions in the air, gale force winds of all kinds, tornadoes, hurricanes, typhoons, etc., and commotions on the ground, such as earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, wildfires, floodings, commotions on the ground. And Christ said there would be, in Matthew 13, he said there would be terike, trouble, roiling waters, troubled waters, both literally and figuratively. Figuratively as mobs and seditions, roiling waters. And related, though, to the primary thing that Christ said would occur with this 4th seal that we'd see escalating, as we see it escalate, he said he compared it to recognizing that summer is nigh when you see the branches of the trees become tender and the little buds start to spring out. When you see these seals really get active, he said, no, the kingdom of God is near, and the kingdom of God is preceded by the fifth seal, which is the next major thing to happen in prophecy, the mega trouble, the great tribulation, as Christ called it in plain language in Matthew 24. But back to this fourth seal. This fourth seal, our next story, 130 people have died in an outbreak of dangerous fever in Sao Paulo. More than 460,000 cases have been reported this year so far. The disease is spread by mosquitoes, and the epidemic is blamed on wet weather and storing contaminated water at a time of water shortage across the country. Peter Dobby has this report.
The most efficient way to spread the word is to go door to door, tannoying and talking to people, telling them that mosquito breeding sites can be anywhere. Government workers are checking locations where they think they might find the larvae of mosquitoes that spread the disease. Year on year, the rate of infection has gone up threefold. That's a worrying development.
So far this year, we have had 30,000 reported cases and 8,000 confirmed cases. We have seen an increase of 2.5 to 3 times more than last year.
For some people, the hunt for the infected water has come too late. They are already suffering the symptoms.
I've got dengue. For 3 days I've had joint pain. I can't eat. I cannot stand up. I've been feeling bad.
There is some hope around the corner. Scientists point to success in using genetically modified mosquitoes in the wild. That means the mosquito's life cycle is normal, but crucially, they can't pass on dengue fever to human beings.
We
have the first mosquito tested in Brazil that was produced in England and belonged to the genetically modified Andes aegypti project. These mosquitoes were released in Bahia state and the population of mosquitoes decreased. So we have already seen that this kind of strategy could work among all the new technologies to combat the mosquito that causes dengue.
But despite its success, that is just a trial. The fight against dengue fever must continue, and that means increased public awareness if the death rate is to be slowed. Peter Dobby, BBC News.
Okay, Peter. All right, caught me with my fan on here. And friends, just in case some of you thought that, okay, there's a little outbreak of that, the disease epidemic stuff, not too bad. We haven't heard about Ebola being in the news for quite some little time. Well, today's news has a story. Actually, this comes from Friday. This is a report from Friday, but part of the weekend news. The World Bank has pledged at least $650 million, that'd be the equivalent of 437 million pounds, to West African countries to help them recover from the Ebola epidemic. That comes on top of about $1 billion already promised. One of the hardest hit countries is Sierra Leone, where more than 3,800 people have died since the outbreak, since it began last year. The number of new cases now is declining, and schools have reopened for the first time in months. But the Ebola crisis has devastated the country's economy, and Sierra Leone is now facing a deep recession. Sierra Leone President Ernest Bai Koroma talked to the BBC's Catty Kay, while in Washington to discuss the crisis with President Barack Obama and other world leaders.
Mr. President, the number of infections in Sierra Leone is now coming down. What is the situation in your country? Describe some of the steps of recovery that you're seeing.
Indeed, the number of infections have come down substantially. By mid-November, we were experiencing 550 new cases per week. But last week, we are now at 7 cases per week. But I believe this is happening because we have put together a good structure that is now coordinating the fight. We have increased the capacity of the treatment centers. We have increased the number of laboratories.
And we're starting to see the impact on the population. I understand that children in Sierra Leone went back to school this week.
Indeed.
How long were they shut for?
Well, since last September, it's been a while.
So children have lost a lot of the school year.
That is why there is a lot of catching up to do. But we have to ensure in the first place that the schools are safe, the children and the teachers can go through and adhere to Ebola protocols.
The loss of the academic year, of course, is only one of the impacts that the Ebola crisis has had on your economy. You came out of a decade of civil war. The Sierra Leonean economy wasn't strong anyway. How much has it suffered because of this Ebola outbreak?
Well, it has. We lost a good number of the activities. Our projected growth in 2014, that was 11.3%, ended up at 4%, and we are projecting about 2-3% growth for this year, and this is the kind of effect it has had on the economy. And directly we have had companies shutting down, mining companies, the tourism has substantially gone down because the flights in the country have been cancelled, and we only have 2 international flights that are in and out. So it has had a devastating effect on the economy.
Okay, friends, we're going to pull out there. That was the point I wanted you to catch. It's had a devastating effect on the country, and even though it's reduced somewhat, Ebola they're still having 7 new cases a week. So they're not out of the woods yet. It isn't over yet. Friends, there is a cause and effect for these things. God tells us in Leviticus 26 and a parallel chapter in Deuteronomy 28 that there are blessings and there are cursings. And the blessings come when? What? When we obey our Creator. That's what he says at the opening. If you diligently hearken unto the voice of your Creator, the great God, and if you obey his commands, his statutes, his voice, and, well, there's something else in there. Since my brain is having a little senior moment, let me just flip there. One good thing is we all have our Bibles, and you can take a look. He says, and it shall come to pass if you shall, I'm reading from the first verse in Deuteronomy 28 now, if you shall diligently hearken diligently unto the voice of the Eternal your God, to observe and do all his commands, which I command you this day, that the Lord God will set you on high. Now, that's what he says in Deuteronomy 28 when they're about to reiterate the commands, but he says back in Leviticus 26, parallel chapter this, principally says basically the same thing. He may cite the blessings a little differently, but he says in verse 3, if you walk in my statutes, that's the one I was looking for that I was not thinking of. If you walk in my statutes and keep my commands and do them, and in verse 2 he says, you shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Eternal. He says then in verse 4, I will give you rain in due season. That's just one of many wonderful promises that God makes for obeying him. In the middle part of the chapter, he says, on the other hand, if you don't obey me, you get just the opposite of the blessings, you get cursings. But let's put our focus and attention on the blessings for a moment. He says, I'll give you rain in due season. Now, the opposite of that, if you're under a curse, you won't get rain in due season. When you do get rain in due season, that means you're not getting drought and you're not getting floods. Because rain in due season means just the right amount of rain. Not too little, not too much. Too little meaning drought, too much meaning floods. You're getting rain in due season. So there's a lot you can understand in that poetic phrasing. Rain in due season. Not too little drought, not too much flood. And when you get sufficient rain, good fresh rainwater cleans up and clears up things and can help you overcome some problems if you're not dealing with your sewage properly. Of course, that's a whole nother issue, really, but in a way, it's something people should be keeping things clean and find ways to keep things clean. And if your water's running short because God's putting you under a curse, you better get busy and try to find some way to keep things sanitary during the curse, or things really get worse, like what's happening in Rio de Janeiro. Tons of dead fish are being removed from a lake, which is due to host rowing and canoeing events at the 2016 Olympic Games. Local politicians say it's a natural phenomenon, but many scientists say it's the result of pollution and waste. Wire Davies has this report.
The smell is almost unbearable, and the sight of so many dead fish in Rio de Janeiro's Rodrigo de Freitas Lagoon is embarrassing for a venue which is due to host rowing and canoeing events at next year's Olympic Games. The company in charge of the cleanup says that more than 37 tons of dead fish have already been removed, but in some areas, a white carpet of dead and dying fish is still clearly visible. Rowers training on the lake this week were having to pick their way through the tide of rotting fish, and many complained of feeling sick afterwards.
For us, the smell is the worst, which we have to breathe. Sometimes we get headaches and feel nauseous. It really bothers us. Today we trained for an hour and 50 minutes. Imagine 1 hour and 50 minutes smelling this.
City authorities say the cause is a combination of high rainfall and the natural breeding cycle, reducing the lagoon's oxygen levels and increasing water temperatures. But many scientists and environmental campaigners disagree. They say the city's notorious pollution problems and uncontrolled levels of sewage in the lagoon are the real reasons for the unpleasant spectacle.
There are small measures for recovering the natural scenario where the Olympics will take place. They are preparing the risers and all the equipment for the sport, but they are forgetting to clean the site where the actual rowing will take place.
Rio's water quality has become one of the most contentious issues before next year's Olympics. City officials have admitted falling behind on promises to clean waterways before the Games, and time is running out to get things right. Willa Davis, BBC News, Rio.
Okay, friends, and our last story tonight is going to relate to, let's go to this chart for a moment, bring it forward. This last story is going to relate to the first seal from the book of Revelation. Many of you will understand what I mean when I say that white seal, that first seal that is depicted by a white horse that Jesus Christ described in plain language, it relates to religion. And as Christ described it in plain language, he said, "Beware, many will come in my name, saying that Jesus is the Christ, and yet they'll deceive many." Now, that's all I'm going to say related to this next story in regard to that, because just the fact that that white horse is related to religion, we'll tie it in with that. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, has spoken out against what he called atrocious pressure on Christians and other minority communities across the Middle East. He was speaking to the BBC during a visit to Egypt as an Islamic State video emerged, appearing to show the killing of 30 Ethiopian Christians in Libya. You'll hear him say in this interview, he says, "I believe Islamic State is deeply evil, even to its own supporters." You'll hear him saying that in this interview with BBC's Lise Doucette.
The Archbishop came to express condolences for the recent beheading of 21 Egyptian Christians in neighbouring Libya. But even as he was meeting the Coptic Pope, more grisly reports were emerging of more beheadings by the so-called Islamic State.
I believe the Islamic State is deeply evil, even to its own supporters, if they stray 1 inch off what is seen as the right road.
Most of the men executed in February came from this village of Al-Ur. They'd gone to Libya to work. Aziz Ghata's lost 2 young sons, about to get married. Families are still mourning, still worrying. Aziz's daughter Mariam tells me the situation for Christians will only get better if all countries support us. We're so afraid, she says, to even speak out. The search for answers also brings the Archbishop to Al-Azhar. It's widely respected by Sunni Muslims as a leading authority on Islamic law.
The growing slaughter of Christians and Muslims across this region is what's bringing together these religious leaders. But as always, the hard question for them is whether faith is enough to confront this growing extremism.
Hey friends, we're going to come on out right there. Thank you for joining me for this Sunday night edition of Nightcast. We were trying an experiment again tonight. We tried it a few nights last week where we are running the live stream that we normally do on cogtv.org. We're also running it on youtube.com as a live event. And we're seeing how our equipment can handle it, our bandwidth. We more than doubled our bandwidth to be able to get the signal out and up to YouTube. And we do have to do something a little different, though, in order to be able to hit all the buttons and sync it in and get YouTube running. We've been having to run a time on the screen at the beginning and run that for about 10 minutes before the show. So if you're not watching live and you're watching this in one of the archives where you find the recording with a countdown on the screen, you know, in YouTube you can advance the video with the little slider down at the bottom. So just slide the thing at the bottom past the countdown when you see it start counting 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Just slide it to right past there. You'll get the beginning of our show and won't have to sit there watching the time on the screen. That, as of this moment, I don't know how to get around that. We'll maybe be able to figure that out later, and we're only testing this anyway. I'm not sure we'll stay with it. We know there's some of our friends on YouTube who run some channels that feature videos of the World Tomorrow program with Mr. Herbert Armstrong hosting, have been finding themselves subject of content ID copyright infringement claims by a Dr. Kenny Ryans, who has become associated with the administration of Grace Community International that has taken an offensive position against Mr. Armstrong and want to use copyright to squelch and hide the truths that God was giving out as a warning to this nation and the UK and to the whole world. Warnings that appear in Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 28, that I'm telling you, if we don't obey our great God, our Creator, we are subjecting ourselves to blessings. We get blessings if we obey, but if we don't, we subject ourselves to just the opposite of those blessings, to cursings, with the ultimate going to what God warned through the prophet Ezekiel in chapter 6, verse 6 of Ezekiel. Ezekiel 6:6, easy to remember. He says, if you continue to disobey me after I warn you, I will lay all of your cities waste. He says it this way. He says, all your cities will be laid waste. Let me flip there and just read that to you directly out of Ezekiel. Chapter 6, verse 6, and we'll close with this tonight. I encourage you, flip your own Bible open and read these words. Some of you are familiar with it. Get yourself reviewed on it, because one day you may wake up with all the cities around you laying waste. Or God may get you out of here just before that if you're practicing what he says to do in Luke 21, verse 36. Watch these things that relate to these escalating four seals and be praying about them. When you see these people suffering disease epidemics, pray for them. When you see them with their water all messed up, pray for them, and pray, of course, thy kingdom come. Because if men don't repent, these kind of conditions and curses will not only continue, God will increase them 7 times. And if men still don't repent, then to Jacob, the time of Jacob's trouble, verse 6, chapter 6, Ezekiel, in all your dwelling places, O Jacob, with the sons who take the name of Joseph, Ephraim in the United Kingdom, and Manasseh, the modern-day descendants of the United States, in all your dwelling places, the cities shall be laid waste. That's it for the Sunday night report, friends. Let's try to obey our Creator. God willing, and the creek don't rise, we'll be back again tomorrow evening, Monday night, with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. I just want to say one more word about the channels that have had their videos removed that feature Mr. Armstrong and World Tomorrow telecast. Some of you have been crying and saying, oh, no, the famine of the word is coming and all that. Mostly the famine of the word is going to be coming when Philadelphia is taken away, because as long as you're here, you are a witness. Many of you have heard Mr. Armstrong. And just because they're being taken off of YouTube at the moment because of their content ID, copyright arrangement, which makes it easy for people to make false claims and have videos removed, those videos are still available in other places, those videos and radio broadcast. And at this moment in time, the agent person hired by Grace Community International is only taking Easy Street. He's only using the easy method that YouTube makes available to make a takedown notice, copyright infringement notice on YouTube, and YouTube just, without the courts involved, just takes the stuff down and even gives those who posted them a strike. And if they get more than 2-3 strikes, then their channel is shut down. Now, some arrangement has been able to make, and there may be a court case on this thing yet, even in those channels that are affected on YouTube. And I've had some people doing some legal research on that, and at this moment in time, it looks like the people that are making the claims don't have a solid situation with this, because they don't make money from Mr. Armstrong's videos. They better not be, because he always said, buy the truth and publish it freely, as the scripture says, and that's what he did. He even paid radio and television stations to run his broadcast. Those who want to run them free are certainly within the principle by which Mr. Armstrong did his broadcast. And whenever there was a problem with the corporate Worldwide Church of God, he had both the umbrella Worldwide Church of God, a spiritual organism, over that, and he switched to using corporate soul. So all of those things they're trying to claim don't fall under the umbrella of the worldwide, the corporation that's what is now called Grace Community International has taken over. It was given to them, but given to them in trust that they would be loyal to the truths God gave us through Mr. Herbert Armstrong. They have betrayed that trust. And just like the principle involved in tithing, as Mr. Armstrong taught in the booklet, Ending Your Financial Worries, he says, 100% of the money you earn belongs to God. In his word, he says, everything, he made everything belongs to him. He says, when you give him back his first tenth, then you get to keep the other 9/10 and use it as you please. But he says, if you don't give him back his first tenth, you're not really entitled to the other 9/10. So by that principle, those who were entrusted to continue the truths that God gave us through Mr. Herbert Armstrong, those who betrayed that trust are not entitled to the assets given with that trust. That includes a lot of the stuff they sold off. They're not really entitled to that, and they're certainly not entitled to the truth that God gave through Mr. Armstrong that he broadcast. If they're going to try to use the copyright to squelch and hide those broadcasts, they're definitely not entitled to copyright protection over it. Well, those are legal things, but I wanted to comment on that because that's fresh. That began to happen last week on April 15. And I know some of you have been bemoaning and lamenting, oh no, we won't get to hear Mr. Armstrong's broadcast anymore. Oh yes, you will. There are other ways, and things are behind the scenes going on even right now to make those videos very available to you, although you won't find them on YouTube for the time being until some court cases are able to go. And of course, even that, we need to be fasting and praying and asking God, what do you want? But at this moment, after I did a day of fasting, the answer came booming in my head. Hey, this is not the famine of the word of Mr. Armstrong's words yet. Because there's all of us, and even his recordings can be and are and will become available even more on other media other than YouTube, which so easily cuts things off when people wrongly make, even when they wrongly make, copyright infringement, takedown notice claims. So I just wanted to encourage some of you that are saying, oh, no, we don't get to see those anymore. Yes, you will. Just maybe not on YouTube, but there'll be other channels and video outlets set up that will be able to play videos just as good, if not better, than YouTube. Maybe I should say just as good, because YouTube does work very, very effectively. But in order for those people making those copyright infringement claims to get them off these other channels, they will have to file lawsuits. They won't be able to just make a paperwork bash to YouTube and have them slammed off. So I hope that's some encouragement to you. And there are other ways we can get those videos around to you too, friends. So hang in there, keep the faith, and obey your Creator, both those of us who know we should, and I say that to anyone else listening who's wondering, why all this trouble around the world? The answer, we keep giving it to you. Read it in the 2 chapters I mentioned to you, Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 28. The answer's right there. Obey the voice of your Creator, diligently hearken to His voice, keep His commands, His statutes, and He'll bless you in the ways He names in those 2 chapters, both individually and as a nation. 5 of you as a nation, 5 of you will put 100 to flight, 100 of you will put 10,000 of your enemy to flight. All right, friends, a little overtime. Thanks for joining me this Sunday night. Again, God willing, Creek Don't Rise. We'll be back again Monday night with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying good night. So long, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on COGTV.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the COGTV.org video archive.